morning, good afternoon, good day, good night, wherever you are, and welcome back to Achampnator Reads with chapter 11 of the last elf. Chapter 11. At dawn, the mist rose up. They set off at a fair place, following the torrent. After a few hours, a light rain began, which did nothing to slow them down. At the end of the morning, they came in sight of the river. The brambles had made way for tall, sweet chestnut trees, which meant that they would walk quickly and on a full belly. They ate the chestnuts raw, so as not to waste time cooking them. The river widened, the sky brightened. The rain stopped. In a loop of the river, they came across 3 houses that stood next to a field of corn and a vineyard. It could only be Astrid, the last village marked on the map. There were meadows and a grove of chestnut trees, with foothills rising up behind it. The dark mountains were not far off. Between the houses were trestles on which a dozen trout stood smoking over a huge copper pot. There was an orchard of trees overflowing with apples. In the middle of the river's loop, tied with big cables and poles, 3 boats bobbed in the current, scattered among the vines. The meadows and the chestnut trees stood 10 or so fine-looking sheep and a few goats. Each of the houses had a chimney pot with smoke emerging from it. Before the endless rain, the whole world must have been as rich and beautiful as this, said the woman. The inhabitants, about a dozen men and women, plus an indefinite number of children, gathered to meet them. They wore clothes made of thick wool, either untreated or dyed with indigo. They looked at the little elf's yellow tunic and the elfish bow the dancer carried. Sorry, guys and girls. But showed neither fear nor malevolence. The hunter spoke first. He greeted them politely, said his own name, and asked if it was possible to buy food, one of the boats, and clothes. The group did not reply immediately. There was a long whispered discussion, and then the one who appeared to be the oldest, a tall man with a short, white beard, asked what they had to pay with. A piece of real gold, suggested the hunter. Interminable haggling followed. There was nothing to be done. The old man wanted 3 coins. The hunter had to give in. Finally, the deal was done. The boat they chose was small, but solid. The hunter loaded on a wineskin of goat's milk, a big sack of apples, a smaller one of corn cobs, and 2 even smaller ones of smoked trout and raisins. Then he bought a tunic, a pair of breeches, and an indigo-colored cloak for Yosh, so that he could free himself of his rough and tattered yellow rags. Yosh's face lit up at the sight of them. The other elf were blue as well, said the old man. The one who passed by a few years ago. The one who sold us for these 3 pieces of gold, the pot of concord and abundance. The what? The pot of concord and abundance, explained the old man, indicating the big smoking pot. It was a strange pot, with a kind of double bottom that held charcoal and logs from which the smoke was rising. While that pot still works, we were protected against poverty and disharmony. The rain now falls only as it should, and since the elf passed this way, the brawling has stopped. Before there were at least 3 brawls every day, and they didn't always end well. We're all handy with knives in these parts. The 3 gold pieces were these very same ones. One of them somewhat oval and another slightly dinted on one side. The little elf is his son, isn't he? Well, it's been a pleasure doing business with you. Not only have we recovered the village's gold, but if you too spread harmony and abundance. It's nice to have helped you. You don't think that having one of the 3 pieces of gold might help us later on? Ventured the hunter. I'm sure you're clever enough to take care of yourselves, the old man replied. The other elf taught us the lesson of commerce and negotiation before he left. He really was an extraordinary creature. Sailing in the boat was wonderful. They just lay on their back while the current did all the work, carrying them in the right direction. The boat was deliciously comfortable. There was a wooden roof to shelter them from the rain, and an iron brazier where they could keep a fire to warm their feet and roast their corn cobs. The river banks were rocky in some places, and in others were lined with slender beaches, but always deserted. For the first time in their lives, their constant companion, hunger, had abandoned them. The little elf even allowed their 3 carnivores a few mouthfuls of smoked trout. The mountains grew closer every day. By now, more of their time was spent in the shadow of the peaks. The little elf stayed silent, close to the brazier, clutching his poetry book. Your father must have had some extremely powerful magic, the hunter said one morning. Grandma said he didn't. Magic isn't the same for everyone. Some have more, some have less. Grandma said that Papa was, all things considered, the least magical elf she had ever met. She said the only thing he could do with his magic was light a fire when he was in good health and the wind was blowing in the right direction. While Grandma even knew how to boil water without fire and cure varicose with herbs. So, how did your father manage to make that village rich and peaceful? How did he get the rain to ease? I don't know. None of it makes any sense. Now the shadows surrounded them on all sides. The river continued on peacefully through the middle of an enormous gorge. Above them, the sky had become a corridor parallel with the river between 2 high rocky walls that flanked it on either side. The walls ran steeply down to the river from great heights. Up above them, on the higher of the 2 walls, a pile of rocks could now be seen. It might have been a peak, but it might also have been a building. But there was no doubt about the huge plume of smoke that hung above it, and the legend engraved beneath it in vast letters. Haec sunt Drakos. Here be dragons. Letters from the 2nd runic dynasty. The current was fast, but the little boat was equipped with an oar, and the man had managed to draw closer to the shore, and moor the boat by throwing a rope around a jagged projection of rock. The rope tensed the little boat abruptly veered into the corner, and its prow settled in a bush. Hidden by the bush was a tiny beach, about a yard or 2 long. It was the only landing area in the whole gorge, and it opened onto a very narrow, steep flight of steps dug into the pale rock. The little elf pulled out his map and looked at it. I've worked out what this sign means. A waterfall. I can hear it. We can't go back, and there's a waterfall ahead. We may as well take the steps. They set off. The steps were narrow and steep, In some places they had collapsed. In others, the moss had made them treacherous and slippery. After they had walked for a few hours, the sun appeared. They were now high enough to see the waterfall, a big vertical wall of water that formed all the colors of the rainbow. The exertion was beginning to take its toll. Sorry, guys and girls. And they were stopping more and more frequently. By the time they reached the top of the steps, it was already early afternoon. Beyond the dark mountains lay a vast plain, and past the plain a long strip of blue that stood out against the sky. The sea. They were seeing the sea. The little elf perked up again, as exhaustion vanished too. He had seen the sea like his father had. Above him towered the words Hic sunt Dracos. Then the road curved around and reached a great stone shape, which they could now see was an enormous rock hollowed out inside to form a building. The summit of the rock was lost in the dense layer of low cloud that surrounded the peak. He had done it. He had arrived. The man held his bow with the arrow at the ready. The woman clutched the little axe. Even the dog seemed rather uneasy, sniffling around nervously. The little elf reached the pinnacle. There was an enormous entrance, flanked by a writing. They were letters from the first runic dynasty. "What's written on it?" asked the man. The little elf began to decipher the writing, feeling both scared and excited. His destiny was about to unfold. His fate was staring him right in the face. Prohibitur sputer. Prohibitur sputer. No spitting. No spitting? That's not possible. Are you sure? The hunter asked. Yes. George baffled too. Wait a minute. We traveled across half the world, wore our lungs out on that damned flight of steps. The steps weren't that bad, the elf protested. They weren't that bad because I was carrying you. I've climbed as many steps as there are drops in the ocean. To come and read a sign telling us that we're not allowed to spit? Wasn't there supposed to be a circle, the future, the sun of the new spring? Have a look and see if there's anything else. There are more scribbles here. There. No spitting, running, making crumbs or taking in a loud voice, confirmed the little elf. Wash your hands before entering, he added. At that moment, the door opened and the dragon appeared. That was chapter 11. Next time, I read chapter 12 and how it continues with the dragon or whatever arrived there. With that, I say, see ya.